So, hello and welcome, well, hang it, thrice welcome, and hang the consequences of that, to another episode of What You Need is a Damn Good Listening To with me, Chris Grimes. And I'm absolutely delighted and indeed very, very excited because I'm going to be talking to a man who I've grown very fond of in a very quick space of time. Charlie Schroeder. Every time we've ever met, I'm going to make a huge presumptive statement here that if we lived closer, I think we'd be very good friends. And you can probably say, no, that's not the case. But good morning, Charlie Schroeder. We know each other through working voices. We have that in common from the get-go. But welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me. I'm very flattered that I'm the third person. I get a bronze medal.
Yeah, you are number 3. And it's a bit like, in the acting background that we also share, the third performance is always the one when you feel actually potentially most relaxed.
Potentially, although I'll probably forget some of my lines tonight. But anyway, it's good to see you. Thank you so much for having me. And I agree, we would be very good friends if we were even closer. I think we're good enough friends as it is right now in a virtual sense.
But thank you for affirming that rather than just going, no, that really wouldn't be the case, Chris. I don't know what you're talking about. But to get you going, we've got an expression in my family, which if we don't really know very much about something, we think, well, hang on a minute, we better Google that shit. And I had a really delightful time Googling you because as we know, okay. Google we are what Google says we are. And may I say how thrilled I am to be interviewing Charlie Schroeder. Woohoo!
That's me.
The first thing that came up.
Boy, that's an old headshot, let me tell you.
Charlie Schroeder 2. Now, you're Charlie Schroeder 1, we both know that. But when I saw this picture, I wondered actually, maybe you could be Charlie Schroeder 2, but who knows?
I've been called number 2 many times.
Wonderful. And then the really exciting thing was I got serious about it. And what's thrilling is you're writer, actor, and radio guy. So laying that on you, what's your favorite way of answering the question, hello, Charlie Schroeder, who exactly are you? So just go on the open road.
Yeah, that's a good question. I at the risk of sounding a bit hokey, I call myself a storyteller because basically every job that I've ever had involves telling stories. So when I first started off, I was an actor, and I interpret stories, as you know, as an actor. And then I sort of graduated into writing, which telling stories, yeah. And then producing radio. In between, I did a little bit of corporate training, and I've been doing more corporate training, as you know, also for the last 6 years, and that's telling stories. So I know it's a bit cheesy to say that you're a storyteller, but really at the foundation of everything I do are stories. And
I echo brilliantly with that. It's just a really lovely answer to talk about the love of narrative and the love of storytelling. And yes, we have working voices.
Have you seen my book, Story?
Yes. Are you referring to a particular book, or are you just saying, check out my stories?
Those are all fake. Because they're not even real books.
And by the way, you're an author too. I'm intrigued in a while to ask you about A Man of War, My Adventures in the World of Historical Re-enactment. In fact, if you like, you can tell us about that first, because that was a beautiful hook when I Googled you this morning. And this is a new experiment. I thought this might be a good way to start the program. So I just thought I'd do that.
Sure. So that's a book that came out in 2012. I wrote it between 2009 and 2012. And it was about my participatory journalistic experience embedding with 10 different reenactment companies across the United States. And I basically reenacted, multiple wars or living history events from ancient Rome right up to the Vietnam War.
Wow.
And these all took place on American soil. As you know, American history, not that old compared to your culture, but a lot of people very into history, a huge Roman population, interestingly, in the United States, a lot of people who dress up as Romans and Celts. And I was turned on to this idea because when I was 21, I acted at something called a Renaissance Fair.
Renaissance.
Now, they don't have Renaissance fairs in England because you actually had the Renaissance. But in America, they create these sort of quasi-Elizabethan shires and people walk around dressed as Queen Elizabeth and Sir Francis Drake and improvise with the audience in character. And that was my first professional gig as an actor. I got to play Romeo in the half-hour version of Romeo and Juliet. But when I wasn't doing that on the Boar's Head stage, I was Garrett Lynch, who was a wannabe thespian and the son of the local sheriff.
And was that a character that you researched and became for yourself as a sort of historical truth? This chap existed?
No.
Yeah, see what I was trying to do there to give you extra credibility. But so you made up a sort of character that could then embed within the enactment.
Yeah, well, I was given that role.
Lovely.
And I had to embody the role of Garrett Lynch. And it was a non-anachronistic Renaissance fair, which meant that we could not improvise outside of the year 1587 or whatever it was. But anyway, so from a very young age in my acting world, I was always very curious about people who dressed up as historical figures.
Yes.
Anyway, cut to many years later, I wrote Man of War because I was curious about why adults would do this for free. I was getting paid to be in this Renaissance fair, but I was very curious about the hobby and what people got out of it. So that's where that was the genesis of the book.
Were you being paid because you were researching a book, or this was in the timeline later on that you went back to re-immerse yourself to make the book?
So I did get paid to write the book, yes, but I was paid to act in the Renaissance fair. So, for me, that was a paying job, but most historical reenactors, they don't get paid for this. Yeah. It's a hobby. And I was always very curious, like, why would people do that? Spend all this money on kits and weapons and reenact battles, but yet they never get paid for it. This is just what they do on the weekend. So I was very curious about that.
And as you said, there's a very rich culture of that also within the UK. There's a society which I think hails from Southampton, which is called the Sealed Knot. In fact,
very famous. Yes.
We're on Facebook together, I know, but there is a chap that you could rummage around for called Pete Minor, who's just a friend of mine who later on, much later in life, was doing a lot of this, but then he became an extra in TV shows because he just loves this ongoing immersion, I suppose, in storytelling.
Yeah, the Sealed Knot is actually one of the most famous historical reenactment groups in the world. Yeah. And also, but what's interesting is that a lot of the historical events that take place in England actually took place there. So the reenactments are on the soil. So whether it's 1066 or the English Civil War, you can go to those sites. Whereas in the United States, you have a very limited supply of historical events that can be reenacted. So to me, that was also very curious. Like, how are you going to reenact ancient Rome? You could reenact ancient Rome in Britain, but you can't do it in America. So
because all roads lead to Rome, but not necessarily in Pennsylvania or wherever you were doing it.
Exactly.
And one of my favorite
Arkansas, as it was.
Arkansas and Gettysburg is a sort of name that's in my head about reenactments. One of my favorite authors is James Lee Burke. I don't know if you've read much of his.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Also, my favorite documentary filmmaker, and I was intrigued when you talked about immersing yourself, is Louis Theroux.
Yes, lovely.
So, I like the idea that you two went immersive in order to research your book.
Exactly. Is that a seagull, by the way?
It is. We have them nesting, sorry, not roofing. They're very skilled artisans.
They're pounding shingles into your roof right now.
They're doing that. This is the time of year when they go slightly dotty. And of course, one of the benefits of lockdown is we can hear more bird song now, but we could have done without the seagulls. But
understood.
Still admire them because they're very sort of robust birds and they do well. So yes, they are, as you say, tiling for me at the moment, which is they're very cheap. So.
Yeah. Do they thatch houses as well? Because that would be fascinating.
Because I'm a comedy improviser, yes, and they do.
They're just kind of
they
leave it like that.
Wonderful. So what I'm wanting to do is take you through this storytelling template of itself. I want to first of all talk about something called the clearing, which is bringing us to a place where we're going to talk about who Charlie Schroeder really is. So the clearing is this idea of a metaphor of where do you go to get clutter-free, to get innovative, to get creative. I'm a comedy improviser. I know you're an actor in background too. We've talked about storytelling. So just tell me, where's the place that Charlie goes to get creative?
So there's a road right outside our apartment here in Hong Kong, where I live, that is refreshingly void of most technological intrusion.
Mhm.
And so I like to run. So that's been, particularly in the last, 6 months, that has been my meditation space, if you will. So I like to go out there and do a little warm up, Chris, and recite some poetry, actually. I've been trying to get off of social media, like the sort of toxic social media of Twitter and Facebook and things like that, and try to focus on some beauty. And so I've been memorizing a few poems, and I go out there and I'll recite the poems for the first kilometer, and then I can't think straight after that just because I'm huffing and puffing. And it's a great way to clear my head. I don't have anything to think about, and I come back very refreshed and rejuvenated. And in fact, after this very interview, I will be going out there to get my sweat on, as the kids say.
And I love that meditative idea of, it links to a Nietzsche quote that I really love, which is the best ideas happen outdoors. And so the idea of you pounding towards something, going at an easy pace, I'm assuming, unless you are really hacking your way through. And have you, because of your radio experience, have you thought of recording the poems that are catching your zeitgeist at the moment?
Funny, you should ask. So I've been making a few videos about writing because I teach a business writing course for working voices. And every time that I record those videos, I say, okay, now I'm going to record some poems. And I film myself reading the poems. And then I watch myself reading the poems. And then I delete the videos of me reading the poems.
Why would you delete them? Because these could be gold. And we're going to talk about alchemy and gold, but actually...
They could also be rust.
Beautiful. And by the way, vocally, you are very interesting. We've got a mutual colleague, Sarah Hollenby, at Working Voices, and she, you just always remind her of Jason Bateman, who is Mr. Ozark. It's a program you hadn't heard of.
I haven't, although, my wife and I are going through we're really retro in that we are now going through the entire series of Modern Family because we never watched it when it was first airing, and we are guffawing because it is truly one of the funniest sitcoms I've ever seen.
And I've not watched that either, so thank you for that nudge.
It's fantastic. The writing is so tight, and the comedic timing, they're just brilliant. But I said after season 3, we're almost finished with it, I said, can we watch this Ozark show? Because I've been told that my doppelgänger is currently starring in it and making a lot more money than I am.
Yes. And he is the main actor in Modern Family, is that right as well?
No, he was in a show called Arrested Development.
Okay.
And when I was a kid, he was in a show called Silver Spoons, which was a sitcom starring my namesake, Ricky Schroeder.
Ah, yes. Lovely. And in fact, we don't want to talk about his career. We want to talk about yours, which is much more exciting. Yeah.
So I'm starting to feel a little bit duped, Chris, that maybe you were more interested in Jason Bateman than you were in me.
No, you're wrong, sir. I'll bring you back into the clearing. So thank you for saying that it's about running and being meditative as you pound your clarity of thought. Yeah,
although I never, truthfully, I never pursued it as any kind of meditative experience. It was more about aging and cardiovascular health and weight control and those types of things. But I found it to be very meditative.
And of course, you did mention in a previous conversation we had that you did the sort of, was it called 0 to 5, the 5 kilometer idea of sofa, what's it called, sofa to 5K or something?
Couch to 5K, yeah. I had tried to run a few times prior and would always injure myself. And then I found this couch to 5K thing, and if you want to run and you don't run, that's the way to run, particularly for those of us who are middle-aged.
Yes, and I'm more middle-aged than you are, I think.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And the compliment I didn't want you to escape from is that you do have a very nice vocal tone, so I would encourage you to keep recording. and trust the rust could be gold. Alchemy, it's a wonderful thing. So in the clearing that we've now agreed, so we're in this space where you're going to be thinking clearly. I've got an apple tree for you in this clearing, and we're going to shake this apple tree to see if apples fall out. How'd you like them apples? And I gave you a construct of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which is a beautiful storytelling exercise, which is where you've been invited to take 5 minutes, or as long as you wanted, to think about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things that really grab your attention, and 1 quirky or unusual fact about you that we also couldn't possibly know until you tell us. Now, don't panic. You don't have to, just data dump the entire thing. But this is shaking your tree to see which apples fall out. Which one of those elements would you like to talk about the most?
I'd like to talk about the one thing that you, what is it? The one thing that you may not know about.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So, because I think that this kind of sums up who I am, is that I was raised in a log cabin that was built in the year 1738. And on one side of our property in Pennsylvania was an Amish farm, and on the other side was a Mennonite school. And that house, when my parents bought it in 1975, when I was 3, I just gave away my age.
Oh, okay. I think I Googled that. I know. I'm older than you, so it's okay.
When they bought it, it was just a shell, and they added on to it, and it became this very, I would say it's a quite eccentric house filled with modern and historical touches. We have sculptures and sculpture in the yard, and my mom's an artist. My dad's a financial advisor. There's touches of quirkiness. There's like a glass walkway that connects the 2 halves of the house because they built on this new addition. And I think growing up next to Amish people who arguably are still historical characters. I mean, they don't have electricity. They plow their fields with horses. I think really shaped my life. And if you look at, for example, Man of War, about this historical reenactment, these reenactments that people do, I think a lot of that motivation for writing that book, for example, was about me trying to get in touch with the past. And I grew up walking by people who haven't really, not that they haven't developed, but in terms of their own, technology since the 18th century.
There's a simplicity. There's a simplicity and a way of being that's very authentic, which I'm getting from that too.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely some Amish who have mobile phones and things like that. But I think that environment completely shaped my life.
Yeah.
We couldn't see another house from that house. There's 5 acres of woods. I had the free reign to play.
Yeah.
There was my mother literally, like if I was playing with friends up in the neighborhood, which was far up the road, she would ring a bell and I would come down. It was like Little House on the Prairie or something.
Big triangle to clang around.
Exactly. And of course, as a kid, you take it for granted. You have no idea that that's unique. And now looking back on it, having lived in New York, having lived in Los Angeles, now living here in Hong Kong, I recognize just how bizarre that upbringing was and how unique it was. And I'm completely a product of that.
And forgive my geographical ignorance, but is that near Pennsylvania? You were born in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I remember reading about you, but yes. How far away is your family home to that?
13 miles.
Oh, okay. And your parents are still there, are they?
Sorry?
Your parents are still there?
Yes.
So this is a real homecoming for you into, going back into it's still there for you as a constant.
Yes. So my father still lives there. My parents are divorced, but my father still lives there. And it's, it was always one of those places when friends who hadn't seen the house came over to the house, they would go, "This is where you live?"
Yeah.
Because it is so unique. There are even Roman numerals carved into the logs because of the way in which they would build them. They would order them so they knew how they would order them. It's very Germanic design. They have very deep window sills, much like you'd see also in older homes in Britain.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So they had, outdoor shutters and a door that was sort of halfway, that would sort of open halfway in the middle. And yeah, I mean, it was unique. And I think I think there's a reason why I freelance. Because I don't think I could actually go to like the same job every day. I think having that uniqueness.
That sense of freedom, space, expansive, because I know also that you've lived in your adult life, you've lived in 4 major different cities, haven't you?
3, yeah. New York, LA, and Hong Kong. Yeah.
And
I did live in London for a year when I was in school. But.
Sure. And how long have you been in Hong Kong for?
8 years.
Yeah.
And
in terms of your path to where next, are you from Hong Kong now? Is that where you're staying, or do you think you have plans to move?
Plans to move back to my hometown, actually. Yeah.
Okay, back to Lancaster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very charming town. I could bore you to tears with all of the information about it, but it's the oldest inland town in America.
Yeah.
Very important in America's history. It's a beautiful town, and it's very quaint. There are a number of smaller towns around it that are very quaint and charming as well.
And I love your sense of story and history, which, as you said, it does define who you are, because you've got this idea of always being anchored to story and to tradition and to history.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're seeing now, particularly given the pandemic that we're going through, anybody who reads history or who understands history would understand that up until this point, in the last, let's say, 100 years since the Spanish flu epidemic, we as a species have been very, very fortunate. You've had numerous vaccines that have come along and eradicated diseases that have been around for centuries. It wasn't all that long ago that people were barely living past the age of 50, women dying in childbirth. We are very, very fortunate to be alive in 2020. And I think when you read a lot of history, as I do, and I love reading history and reading old journals, you just see how delicate life was back then. And I think that it would help every world leader if they picked up a history book and understood, how things have happened before them, and how we got to this point where we are now, and how to respect science and all the advances that we've had.
Beautiful.
All right, I'm getting off that horse.
No, thank you for riding that particular stallion into the clearing. We love that. Didn't introduce the horse, but you brought one in beautifully, and we'll park him there for now. What we also share in common, Charlie, is our, we work for Working Voices, which is this wonderful global communication skills entity. And in fact, we had our most time together just before Christmas last year, when we were all descending as the Working Voices tribe and massive into Abu Dhabi. And
yes,
that was where I genuinely sort of double took at you, realizing, gosh, what an interesting guy. So I was very sort of drawn to you, having known of you, but being in the same geography made a real difference, I noticed.
Right back at you.
So what, in your journey to now, what has brought you, in all the evolving you've described, what has brought you to the Working Voices clearing?
I think it's the fact that I made a living as an actor and as a writer. And again, going back to communication, I had a teacher actually when I was in London, a really wonderful director named Richard Cottrell. And one of his phrases that he repeated over and over again is that acting is, he said, we're in the communication business. And I've always loved people. I've always been very interested in people. I've always, even in high school, I was friends with a wide range of people. I didn't discriminate. And I think that if that's in you, eventually you find your way. The job starts to, we may think when we're 22 that we know what our trajectory is going to be. But over time, I think, Working Voices was such an obvious answer. Now that I think back on it, my mom's an artist. My dad's a financial advisor. I was raised in a family that had communication and art and imagination, and also the practical side of balancing a checkbook. I understood both worlds. And so it's almost fate, I think, when you grow up in that. I mean, my brother's a financial journalist. So you know, we're both working in the communications business, and we both happen to work, or at least in Working Voices case, you know, probably 85% of the time for financial institutions. So it's a world that I understand very well, and I also understand the communications business.
And in also how you've evolved, one of my favorite quotes, which will be familiar to you, is it's all about the relationship, stupid. So it's just about finding a tribe where you can let your relationships unfold.
Yeah, and you know, you learn, I think one of the key things that I've learned over time is, you know, it's very simple, but do good work and be good to work with. It's so obvious, and probably everybody has said that at some college graduation, but those are the things that we have to keep in mind. You know, I think when you're younger, you play the short game a lot because you think that you're going to hit it big, and when that doesn't happen, you get disappointed and you burn bridges. And I burned bridges when I was younger. I wasn't very savvy about that. I think the older you get, the more you realize that life is a long game. It's a marathon.
Yeah.
And relationships are absolutely vital because you never know where somebody's going to go or land. For me, it was meeting Nick Fordham here in Hong Kong. I was doing some work, doing role play work for another company, and he needed somebody, called me up, we hit it off, and the rest is history.
And we share that in common too. I first cut my teeth on doing professional actor role play. That's how I got into this whole journey as well. Wonderful stuff. Yeah. Also, I love the factory default settings of some really sort of ancient wise adages which we can anchor to. You know, I like, you know, whatever you are, be a good one. And it's just this idea of just echolocating to certain principles that will keep you resilient and keep you, you know, if you do good work, people will come back to you, to us. That's what it's all about.
My two favorite quotes, one is by Samuel Beckett, which is, ever try, ever fail, no matter, try again, fail better. Good one. And then this one, I learned it from a psychologist friend of mine, but I don't know who originated it. And that is, what you feed attention grows. What you feed attention, meaning like, where do you place your energy? And if you place your energy in that direction, that'll grow. If you tend to be quite optimistic about the future, you tend to be happy. If you're quite pessimistic about the past and you're constantly feeding attention to that, you're depressed. I've been making these videos now. I'm getting much better at the editing and all this other stuff because I'm feeding it attention, and that's growing. And I think now when, you know, like the training world has been upended and we've had to go from face-to-face to online training, you know, what you feed attention grows. You could say to yourself, you know what, I don't like online training. It's not as human. It's not as interactive. I don't feel like people are getting as much out of it, blah, blah, blah. Or you can say, you know, this is an opportunity. This is a chance for us to learn. This is a chance for us to teach in a different way and train in a different way, and to make the most out of it. And I choose the latter.
I know exactly what you mean. And indeed, as we know, out of adversity comes great creativity. And, you know, even the fact we're having this conversation, this idea for me has come about because of the fact that we've had a bit of a seismic tectonic shift into a new way of being. So, you know,
absolutely,
to be adaptable, to be agile is the only way we can survive, really.
Well, and that's what we teach, right? I mean, one of the core sort of tenets of the Working Voices curriculum is flexibility and adaptability, and you have to be, otherwise the world's going to pass you by right now, and other people will raise their game, and they'll say, okay, fine, we're going to take this opportunity. And so I think that's an important one.
And I do genuinely love that quote about what you pay your attention to, where you put your focus, it will grow. That's good learnings for all of us. You did a gesture about 3 paragraphs ago where you did this, which gives me a beautiful segue into now presenting you with a cake, Mr. Charlie Schroeder, a metaphorical cake in the clearing that we've been discussing. You know, the alchemy and the gold that you bring is really implicit in everything that you've been describing and talking about and expounding upon. But I'd invite you now to put your cherry on the cake. You've given us some delicious quotes anyway, and I've you know, resonated and chimed with them you know, brilliantly with you. I love them. But what's the cherry on the cake? What's the most favorite thing that you find yourself when you're really in your zone helping others? What do you like to impart to them?
What do I like to impart to them? I think for me, it's, I'll use the writing class that I do as an example, because I always tell people, I'm going to be with you for the next 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever, and then I disappear. I will never see you again. So what I want people to become are their own best editors. So to imagine that I'm like the little person on their shoulder when they're writing their next report or whatever, and they can hear my voice. I was very fortunate because one of my first pieces that I sold was sold to the Los Angeles Times. And I worked with an editor who was an absolute genius. She taught me how to write. And to this day, I think I can hear her voice in my head. And for that, I want to haunt people, Chris, is what I'm trying to say. I want to haunt their dreams. I want them to hear that, because I think we've all had those people in our lives, whether they're teachers or editors or directors or fellow actors or whatever, who have said things that they're not aware of the impact that they had, but we remember them. And so for me, I always try to think, how can I be that person so that when I walk away, they remember those things. They remember, I remember that, who was that guy who was Amish? Who was he? He came in on the horse and buggy, and then he taught me something, and he smelled like manure. Well, who was that guy? You know, that's what I hope. I hope that they can take a few words of wisdom and remember them forever, so that when they're stuck in a difficult position, they can go, I know how to get out of this.
I absolutely love that. Out of manure comes gold, and I would like to haunt people. I love that.
I want to be the creepy Amish person who smells of manure that comes late at night in your dreams and wakes you up and puts you in a cold sweat.
Sort of a scratch and sniff of personal impact. I love it. So, Charlie Schroeder, it's been an absolute pleasure welcoming you to What You Need Is a Damn Good Listening To. Can we give each other a round of applause? Well done. You are indeed a joy, sir. And
I love this.
Please move a bit closer, because again, I'll just say this. I think we're really good friends virtually, but I could almost kiss you. That was lovely. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And your breath is very minty. It's lovely.
Goodbye.